Good morning. My name is Jonathan Barberá. I am part of the technical department of 3A. We would like to thank the organizers of this event and, of course, to all of you for the assistance as well for making this event possible. We would like to share some challenges that we have came across while talking about the production of meals originated by animal fat, as well as some additives that are going to help during the manufacturing and the processing of these final products. Um, in a very summarized way, we would like to share topics that we would like to touch upon. I am going to talk about 3 antioxidants, and then towards the end, I'm going to talk about some technical terms that we would like you to be aware of. And we are going to start with the presentation of 3A. Then we're going to go over a technical chapter talking about the stability methods and analytical uncertainties. Then we are going to talk about spontaneous combustion. And then we are going to wrap up talking about challenges when it comes to the production of different meals. In a very brief way, allow me to present 3A. It's a Spanish company. It was launched in the 2000s. It's focused on preservatives for different sectors, especially rendering and as well as pet food. The pillar of this development has to do with the chemo availability, so obtain these availability of the active principles that are used, meeting the physical chemical characteristics of what I'm trying to stabilize. So this allows us a shield for the upcoming future that alongside with solutions and developments of natural antioxidants and a continuous evaluation that it's tailored for each companies that will make that 3A is a very reliable partner. That being said, let's go over the technical part. So during the processing of the raw material, again, we're talking about meat products. So it's very important to understand the variable of the process that defines the technical specificity of the meal or the fat. So these variables take into account the raw material that also take into account the antioxidant formation, as well as the different elements for the formation of the product. All of that defines the technical specification of the meal or the fat. When it comes to the meal, it defines the level of protein, the moisture, acidity, and also parameters that are connected to oxidation, like secondary compounds and antioxidant residuals, as well the shelf life of this product. So let me just go about a reflection here first, because taking into account the same conditions of process when it comes to the freshness as well as the procedure conditions, these analyses always show fluctuations. That means that they are not different meals, however, or the oxidation stage has to be different. This reflection here actually make us or show us a necessity, which is launch correctly our technical specification according to what the customer demands. Why? Because meeting our expectations, it's important to have here some parameters, the analytical system that is going to be used to measure variables that were briefly mentioned. This is very important, so that allows us to generate a trust connection of value as well as a trust from our customer. From now on, I'm going to show you examples that the lack of a knowledge of analysis and analytical methods resulted in inaccurate results. So the first case, let's talk about um, a poultry meal. The samples during the process, we had 5 different samples, 5 hours, not consecutive, but these samples were divided and the other ones for on the 3A labs. To move forward the analysis of the variable, it was the peroxido index. So how we can see here, as we can see here, the value of the peroxido index of an external lab is much higher than the ones that were obtained in the 3A. We're talking about 16.3, 9.6, 9.8, while in the 3A lab, we were talking about 2.6, actually 2.6. Take a look at it. This is very interesting. It's important to see the difference between the internal lab as well as the external lab. In this case, the internal one is the 3A. By the way, we can actually compare it because in 3.8 was done the same analysis, meaning uh, two different methods. And we can see how in the two bottom lines, light green and dark green, how they point out differences between one another. And that makes us, not only when it comes to this sample or this, knowing that the transportation conditions could have been different, the storage of this samples and the method that was selected also should be taken into consideration when it comes to the results. Another example that was used here, it was a pet food. In this case, we were using two different samples. We used two different labs, and it was also done in 3A lab. On the first one, the first graph, we see the value of peroxide index is very similar, as opposed to the second sample on 3A lab shows a lower data. And here we have a very important question we need to pose. For this variable, the thing here is not easy to be defined, the peroxide index. And here we're talking about a already processed meal. There's no like an international standard, but yeah, for fat, but not elements that derive from this meal. What is determinant for this lab is the procedure that we can think when it comes to this analysis. Something else here, when it comes to a chicken meal or poultry meal, we defined an objective of an antioxidant of 275 according to the chemical elements. And the analysis show 153 and 177 parts per million, which makes us think that the objective is not being met. So let's prove the concept here. All analytical method has an uncertainty, like a fluctuation. I'm not always going to have the same value, but here this value for this analysis technique, which was HPC, to determine the chemical parameters, the order is from 15 to 20% of the value detected. That makes us say or conclude that the real value detected comes around 215 to 291 of BHT, and the other one for the other element. Technically speaking, then it seems that we met the objective.
So that should be supported by a more profound statistical analysis because that is just a sample. So, in summary, it's important to have deep knowledge of analytical methods. We need to understand the uncertainties for every parameter. And thus, at 3A, we organize the intercomparisons between our labs and others. And that's my recommendation because we always need to prove that. And finally, something else in our experience is that in the process of production, we need to evaluate which processes can intensify the oxidation processes. So now going into the technical aspects, auto combustion. I want to show you two articles from the press because the self-combustion is more common than one can imagine. So we have carbon and manure that lead to combustion. And there is the fire triangle, right? So to have a combustion, we need three variables. The combustible, activation, energy, and also the oxidizing. So the spontaneous combustion is an example that there's a rise in temperature, ignition temperature, and that leads the meal to have internal combustion. So how is the heat produced and spread? It's produced inside the meal through the oxidation reactions, which are exothermic reactions that create heat. The other reaction is biological and are typical from fermentation reactions. In our experience, that also happens. And what are the variables I have to control spontaneous combustion? So first, we need a cooler. The absence of a cooler increases the risk of combustion. So of course, the type of fat uh, plays into this, right? The more it's polysaturated, the more risk it has. We also need to look at the types of antioxidants and the amount of them. We also know that bagged products have a greater risk, and uh, meals and its humidity also have a greater risk. We also need to look at the storage conditions. So the conditions where we have air currents can spread the heat. But when the combustion process begins, I do not recommend airing that. You need to consume all the oxygen that's inside. So a different point here are other challenges that we have in the industry. So first is the compacting of the meal before the grinding. The other challenge is an increase in mold in the sack. And finally, there's a higher need for antioxidants because we have a high concentration of iron because of the bone and blood. So, what factors influence the compactation of meal in the process? So, we have the decrease of temperature and the fatty acid profile that is saturated, that leads into the compaction and a difficulty in grinding. So also there's an increase in temperature and humidity, and all that can be shared and leading into a problem in the mill. So what are the factors that influence mold growth in the factory? So mold needs nutrients, uh, oxygen, temperature, and humidity. The humidity for fungi uh, is uh, is elevated. So the more humidity, the more water you have. Also, we have the process conditions. So the storage leads into the meal having more humidity. So high humidity increases mold. And what are the variables that allow us to uh, work with this? We need to cool down the meal. We also need to control the storage conditions in terms of humidity in air and temperature as well, and we can mitigate these cases. And finally, pulverizing an antibacterial, antifungal solution to increase the shelf life of the product. Finally, we have the requirements when looking at ash and iron coming from blood. So ashes have a high concentration of minerals. Some of them are pro-oxidants. So in the case of iron, we have of blood, we have iron, and like we'll see now, that's a critical variable because it accelerates the oxidation. So this is an example. We have fish fat, and you can use that for meals as well. So we stabilized it for 12 hours, and that same fish oil stabilized and in the same conditions received an additive with 55 parts per million of iron. So the antioxidant decreases 50% of the solution. So of its performance. So the proportion of ash, when we have ash, it's critical to have antioxidants. So we need to look at the antioxidants design. And also, what are these basic golden ideas, right? We need to have knowledge of analytical methods and uncertainty. We also have the control of spontaneous combustion by means of the variables and antioxidants, and also monitoring the environmental and process conditions. I want to thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, I'm available.